Hey everyone, my name is Ned, and today I'd like to sort of continue off and perhaps finalize the ARK tutorial series by covering how to create your own clusters for your server. Some people don't know what a cluster is, and so I want to sort of explain it in this video in the most basic way possible. That way sort of everyone can have a good understanding of it. Okay, so I've got this little illustration here. I know it's really bad, I don't want to waste your time. So in ARK terms, a cluster is basically a group of servers that are strung together. So let's say this is Ragnarok and this is the island and this is Scorched Earth. Normally with ARK servers, if you didn't have them in a cluster, you wouldn't be able to transfer from Ragnarok over to the island or over to Scorched Earth or vice versa. But with a cluster, you can string all of these ARKs together in a way where you can upload yourself to either an obelisk or a supply crate or a tech transmitter, and then you can transfer your character or any of your stuff or creatures over to these other different ARKs, over to these different maps, right? So as unnecessary as that probably was, let me explain how to do this and the requirements. Firstly, you do need to keep in mind that in order to run multiple ARK servers, you do need a pretty decent amount of RAM and a fairly good CPU. Each ARK server takes up roughly 4 gigabytes of RAM, around there usually, as it's running idly. If you're gonna run 3 servers or more, you're probably going to want more than 16 gigs if you plan on playing on the same PC that you're hosting off of. Another thing is clusters can be as big or small as you want them to be. It could be 2 maps in a cluster, or it could be 9 like I have on Vanilla Evolved, or it could be 50. It's really just based on how much the computer that's hosting it can really handle. Now you're also going to want to follow my previous few guides. Specifically, you're going to want to follow my how to create an ARK server, which I'll have on the screen now, and also in the description or in the thing on the screen, I think you'll see it. And then you also want to follow the port forwarding guide. That'll show you how to port forward. For each server, you need a minimum of 2 ports. Let's say, for example, server 1, let's say the island, has a port of 777 and a query port of 27015, right? That can be the island. And if you want, you can open an additional port for each server. So for example, 7778, right? And then let's say you want to open a Scorched Earth server 2. So you could then have 7779 as the port that it's using. Open 7780 just to have an extra raw game client port open, even though it's not necessary. So just remember, this middle port, or really having a third 77 port, is not necessary. It's just sort of an extra precaution thing that the wiki says. I don't know why it does it, but you can certainly read more on the wiki. I'll leave in the description. And then of course you could also do 27016 or 17. It doesn't have to go in any particular order. I usually just add them in order of, +1 each time, or I guess in the 77 port it would be +2 because I account for this middle port, or the second 77 port. And so this would be server 2, and then you could do for server 3, let's say the map Aberration, you could do 77781, 7782, 27017, right? And in each case, in the command line, you would have this be the port, and then this be the query port, right? And that would sort of apply to each of them, right? So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, you can of course leave a comment and I will try to get to it. I've had a huge influx of comments recently, so it may be weird or take a while. You can also hit me up on Discord. Now with that out of the way, hopefully you understand that. If you don't, I will explain it a little further in a second. So let's head over to our binaries and then Win64 folder. Again, if you don't have this, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you want to first go back again to my how to create a server video. This will teach you exactly how to actually make your server in the first place. And then we'll scroll down to these batch files. So if you've already made your server and you've already got your batch file to run it, you're probably just gonna have one of these. Now I have 9 here, as you can see. This is for each of the official maps currently out. Right now Genesis Part 2 hasn't come out, nor has any other non-story maps besides the most recent one, which is Crystal Isles. So let's poke around in this command line and I'll sort of show you what's happening here. So as you can see, this is the island command line. So it says the island, session name, Vanilla Evolved, that's the name of my server. I've got alt save directory name set to a folder called, so it's set to the island. So it's gonna create a folder called the island. As you can see right here, it's created this folder, the island, because I've told it to. We've got a query port of 27022, a port of 7777, and then near the end, we've got this parameter right here. So this is called the cluster ID parameter, as you can tell. And what it does is it allows you to essentially set in the command line a unique ID for your cluster to use. And it uses this ID, as long as you've got this shared across all your servers, they know exactly what cluster to route to. So let's say I called mine Netty the Noodle for some reason, and then I had this in each of my batch files, which I'll show you in a second. They're all going to use the same cluster ID, Netty the Noodle, and so they can connect properly and be able to actually be strung together. If they don't have a shared cluster ID, they're going to be in separate clusters. So you want to make sure that each of your servers have this cluster ID Netty the Noodle. Now, what's important is that the reason I have these different batch files is this is how I start each server in the cluster. And so basically each of these batch files is launching an ARK server in a slightly different way. That's using a different port and a different name, a different save file name, and then also a different query port. So it's using all these different parameters to make sure that I can differentiate itself properly in a way that it doesn't conflict or override or sort of in any way act as the same server as any of the other ones. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'll show you what I mean. If we go to, for example, my Valguero command line, and we go over to the alt save directory name, as you can see, this one, instead of the island, this is called Valguero. And so you want to differentiate that. You'll also probably want to change the name. You can certainly change the map, of course, as well, but you can also have multiple servers on the same map if you'd like. As you can see, I've got a different query port and a different port. So if we look at the island one again, right? The query port on the island is 27022, the query port on Valguero is 27029, and as is the port's different too. And then lastly, the cluster ID is also going to be, you'd want it to be the same, so I'm using Netty the Noodle. Now you want to make sure that your cluster ID is something unique, something fairly unique. Don't set it to just 1, 2, 3, because what this can allow, I believe, is that other people, if they have the same cluster ID, they'll actually be able to transfer to your server since they technically have the same ID. This may not be true if you have this parameter as well, called no transfer from filtering. It might make it, I think it makes it to where people from outside your specific directory can't actually connect even if they have the same cluster ID, but I could be wrong. In any case, I recommend having it if you're going to have a cluster, and just make sure you've got some unique thing. You could honestly just do random characters if you wanted, it's up to you. So once you've got your different command lines with your different ports and query ports, then you should have, essentially you're going to have these different batch files. You want to create a different batch file for each of these, of course. Once you've got your different batch files, you can just start each of them up. And just keep in mind, of course, you need a strong enough PC to do this. You need a lot of RAM, you need a decent CPU. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, as long as you change the name, the port, the query port, and the alt save directory, and keep the same cluster ID, then you will be good. Oh, I almost forgot. Okay, so what I actually forgot to do is show you how to connect the different servers in your cluster. And so to do this, you want to first add them to your favorites. You can of course do this by in Steam, go up to View, Servers, Favorites, and then you want to click Add a Server, and you want to type in your, it's going to depend actually. If you're the host, you may have to do localhost and then colon and then the query port that you use. So let's say you used 27016 for the island, and then use 27015 for Valguero, 270 or something for Ragnarok. You want to add those. If that doesn't work, then you may have to use your public IP. Other people outside your network will have to use your public IP, so whatever that may be, you can find that by going to ipchicken.com. I'll have a link in the description as well. That'll show you your public IP, but for the host, it can be either localhost or it'll be your IPv4, which is essentially your private IP. You can find that by going to command prompt ipconfig. This is usually 192.168.1. Something like that. But then once you've added it, it should show up here, assuming you've port forwarded and everything correctly and you followed my previous tutorials. And then to actually transfer within your cluster, I will show you that right now. Okay, so to transfer within your cluster, you want to click, whenever you go inside of the sort of tribute terminal of an obelisk or a supply crate, you should see this travel to another server option. If you don't see it and it says upload survivor, that means there's something wrong with your cluster, there's something wrong with the port forwarding or something like that that's making it to where you don't actually see any servers within the cluster itself other than the one that you're essentially on. So if you've done it correctly, you should see travel to another server. If you don't see it, hit me up on Discord or in the comments, and then you want to click travel to another server, and you should see the other servers in your cluster. I obviously have every single map, so it's a little absurd. You see a lot on my cluster. Click on the map that you want to transfer to, click join with survivor. Keep in mind, if your servers are password protected, make sure you check this box. If they aren't, then they should show up here. So let's say I want to go to Aberration for some reason, right? Let's go to Aberration. Okay, so I've just loaded in, and as you can see, I'm at the respawn menu. So then I can either spawn on a bed that I have. If I don't already have a bed, I can just spawn a spawn zone, and I am here on the server with all my stuff. You will spawn with all your stuff unless you have a setting that disables this. What is that? Okay, anyways, if you're like, I'm gonna get out of here before these raptors kill me. If you like the video, like it. If it helped you, subscribe. I will talk to you later. Keep well. Bye, everyone.